What's up, everybody? This is Jose with Oakland Latinos Unidos, aka Oakland Latinos United, voice of the Latino community in the Bay Area, California, YouTube, and beyond. Now, the name of the video today that I want to make is simply called The Story of Robert Castorena. And why is it called that? And who is Robert Castorena? And why am I making a video about him? Well, Robert Castorena was a former teacher in the Sacramento Unified School District in Sacramento, California. And he was a teacher, and he taught at several schools, including Wilsey Wood, Hiram Johnson, McClatchy High School. And what does that have to do with me? And what does that have to do with Oakland Latinos United if the story is about Sacramento? Well, if you've been watching my videos for many years, you probably might have heard me mention that I lived in Sacramento for a time. And yes, I moved to Sacramento, and I lived there for about 3 years, roughly. I went for one semester to a junior high school called Wilsey Wood in South Sacramento, and I went 2 semesters to a school called Hiram Johnson High School in South Sacramento before I moved back to the Bay Area. And we had moved to Sacramento for a time because my parents wanted to get away from some of the stuff that was going on in Oakland. There was a lot of violence going on, gang and drug violence, and my brother was involved in a lot of it. And there had been a lot of situations that had happened with my brother, my dad, and several family members that they wanted to leave Oakland to get away, so we went to Sacramento. But the reason I want to talk about Robert Castorena is because this is basically the things that I talk about. I've talked about in the past that one of the reasons that we get caught up in violence and drugs, hopelessness, is because we have bad schools and bad teachers. You know what I mean? And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Why do I want to talk about Robert Castorena in particular? Because I actually had him as a teacher twice. For a minute, I had him as a teacher when I was at Wilsey Wood, and for a couple of classes, I had him as a substitute at Hiram Johnson High School. And why is he in a Sacramento County jail jumpsuit? Well, in 1996, and I had already moved back to the Bay Area by the time this had happened, Robert Castorena killed his wife, Janice Baker Castorena, stabbed her and slit her throat. A grisly murder, straight murdered his wife. And he had 2 kids living with him. They had lived in a house in South Sacramento in an area called Southland Park area on a street called Flora Vista. And basically he killed his wife. He threatened his kids that if they told the police, he had 2 kids, an 11-year-old and I think a 9-year-old or something like that. And he threatened his kids that if they told anyone or told the police, he would kill them too. He took off and left the body in the back room of the house and told the kids they're not allowed to go in the house. And he took off and actually took off to Mexico, to San Miguel de Allende. His kids were terrified of him, and they eventually started to get hungry when he wasn't there and their mom wasn't there. So one of them went shoplifting to a store, a nearby grocery store, and got caught. And he told the police what had happened. So the police went to the house and found the dead wife in the back of the house. Now, the news story of his murder and his capture, he was captured, like I said, in San Miguel de Allende. I think that's in Guanajuato, in Mexico. It made news all over California. And I remember seeing about it, hearing about it in local Bay Area news. And I was like, holy fuck, I know that dude. I had him as a teacher. And I want to talk about when he was my teacher for a brief time at Wilsey Wood and at Hiram Johnson. I remember him being, when I first met him, we called him Mr. Castorena. And I remember he was a Chicano or a Latino. I believe he was Mexicano. He was very skinny at the time, very clean cut, had short hair, didn't have long hair like he does here. Kind of soft-spoken, quiet dude. Kind of weird, though. Like, something was always off about that dude, I swear. Even at that time, me being like a 14-year-old, I could see that something was off about homeboy. And I remember I used to give him a hard time. I was a pretty fucked up kid, you know. Remember, I'm a kid who had just moved to Sacramento from Oakland. I didn't know nobody in Sacramento, and I was so fucked. I did not want to be in Sacramento. I was like, I hate this fucking place. At the time, that was my mentality because I didn't know nothing but the Bay Area. So, you know, I took out a lot of my frustration on a lot of my teachers, and he was one of them. And I remember one time I got into it with another student, and Mr. Castorena tried to, like, he got mad at me, and I cussed him out, and he just got fucking pissed, and he sent me to the vice principal's office, and I almost got suspended. And if I want to say that he didn't allow me to go back to the class for a while, like, he was pissed at me. You know what I mean? And then some time had passed. Oh, yeah. And then I remember when I had him, he used to always talk about how he was an Iraqi war vet. The Iraq war had just passed before I moved to Oakland. To Sacramento from Oakland. And he claimed that he had been in the war. I don't know how true that was, if he was full of shit. Later on, a couple years later, before I moved back to the Bay at Hiram Johnson, I had seen him. He was substituting a class I had, and he was like, "Hey, Jose, how you been?" And he looked totally different. He had long hair like he has here. He had a beard. He had a big beard. He looked like a hippie kind of, and he looked different. I didn't even recognize him at first. And he had a big cross. I remember, like a big cross necklace. And he was still odd like always, but he was like, "Hey, what's up? Jose, how you been?" I'm like, "Oh," and I remember telling him, you know, I'm probably going to move back to the Bay Area, so next semester I'm not going to be here no more. And he was like, "Oh, okay, well, hopefully you finish school in the Bay." And that was the last time I ever seen him. And then he got arrested, you know, a few years later in 1996 for killing his wife. And like I said, he lived on Flora Vista Lane and in Southland Park, South Sacramento, and he killed his wife. And I was like, holy fuck. I wasn't surprised too much because he was a weird dude and he was always off. Even when I had him as a teacher, a lot of students would agree that something was weird about homeboy. I mean, he's just a weird personality. So I wasn't too surprised. But my point is, these are the kind of people that they hire to teach at our schools. I learned something later on in Sacramento. The Sacramento schools at the time in the Sacramento School District, they didn't do background checks on people, and they would just hire anybody. You know what I mean? And imagine, they put this dude to teach in schools that were majority black and brown and Asian, and, you know, he's a fucking future serial killer. I mean, and these are the kind of people that they put to teach in our schools. Can you imagine that? Just the thought of that. Some dude that fucking killed his wife and threatened his kids, you know what I mean? And did a gruesome murder and then ran away to Mexico and didn't give a fuck. I mean, imagine if he would have went crazy and killed a bunch of students, man. So it's just like, you know, and then they didn't used to, according to what I read, that Sacramento didn't used to do background checks back in the days. And around the same time at Rio Vista High School, a girl named Michelle Montoya was killed by a janitor. And this was around the same time this happened. And Rio Vista is also in Sacramento. So it's just like another example of bad teachers, bad schooling, putting a future fucking serial killer to teach at schools full of black and brown kids. This guy was my teacher at one point. And it just goes to show you, man. It just goes to show it's another example of the failures of our system with our people, man. You know, much respect to the family of his wife, Janice Baker Castorena. Much respect to his kids. They're probably adults now. They're probably in their 30s now. And the weird twist to the story is after he got arrested, he was put in a mental institution because he was declared insane. And in 2017, almost 20 years after the murder, well, yeah, it was more than 20 years, 20-something years after the murder, 21 years, he was finally sentenced to 15 years of life in prison. You know what I mean? Because he was finally declared sane enough to go to trial. So that's the story of Robert Castorena. And just think about that. Reflect on that, on the kind of people they put in barrio and hood schools to teach, man. Unfortunately, this dude was a young Chicano, a young brown man. But he turned out to be a piece of shit. And he's going to live out the rest of his days a piece of shit. You know what I mean? So, it is what it is. Like I said, much respect to the family of the victims and to his kids. Sadly, they have to go through that trauma. But like I said, this dude was a weirdo. And if anyone has class, you probably would agree that he was a weirdo. Well, that's all I really have to say. This was said with Oakland Latinos United. Late.